One evening, I came home earlier than usual, swapped my work clothes for something more comfortable, and waited for Helen to call me into the kitchen. But, to my surprise, she completely ignored me, caught up in an animated phone conversation. Must be an important call, I figured, and went ahead to make myself something to eat. We've been living alone for years. The kids had grown up and flown the nest long ago. Heaven didn't work. There wasn't any need for it. She poured all her energy into keeping the house in order. Eventually, I heard her footsteps echoing down the hallway. "Stella, when did you get a fur coat from your husband?" she quipped sarcastically as she entered the kitchen, putting her phone aside. "You've got a fur coat, Helen. What's this about now?" "Oh, please, that thing's ancient." "From you? I'll never get anything new," she grumbled, her tone tinged with frustration. I knew better than to argue. After 25 years together, I'd learned that somehow I always ended up being the villain in her stories. "You didn't even bother to bring me flowers for our anniversary," she muttered, a little softer this time. "Helen, I'm sorry. I forgot, okay. It happens," I offered, handing her the dirty plate I'd just used. "You know what? I'm done with this kind of life. All these years, I've cared for you and the kids. Now I want to live for myself," she exclaimed, tossing the plate into the sink with a clatter. "Oh, stop. Quit acting up. I'm not lounging around. Aren't they earning for us?" I countered, feeling the tension rise. "Oh, really? Blaming me now, are you?" she screamed, storming out of the kitchen. Honestly, I'd grown accustomed to her dramatic outbursts, but this felt different. Something in the air weighed heavy, unsettling me. Deciding to smooth things over, I followed her to the bedroom, but the sight stopped me cold. Helen was pulling clothes from the closet, flinging them onto the bed in a fury. "Helen, what are you doing?" "I'm leaving, Andrew. I've had enough." "All you do is treat me like a maid. Fetch this? Do that. Forget a compliment, or even a simple thank you," she spat, not breaking stride. I just stood there, stunned, watching her pack with a single-minded determination. I tried to give her everything she wanted, yet she was still unhappy. She stuffed a bag with some essentials and brushed past me toward the hallway. "I'll grab the rest later," she shouted. "You'll regret this." I called after her, trying to shake her resolve. "Oh, spare me," she retorted before slamming the door shut behind her. Helen had always been impulsive, even threatening divorce during heated arguments. But this time, it felt final. Yesterday morning, everything seemed perfectly normal, and now, it was like she'd turned into someone else. A thought clawed its way into my mind. Maybe she had someone else, and this was her excuse to leave. That realization hit me like a punch to the gut. Furious, I stumbled into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of vodka, and downed it in one gulp. Anger and betrayal churned in my chest as I sat there, stewing. Eventually, I drifted off to sleep right at the table, only to wake hours later, long past work hours. The next day, Helen returned around lunchtime. She probably thought I'd be at the office, but there I was, still at home. Her eyes widened briefly when she spotted me. "You're here." "Well, I came to grab the rest of my things." "Helen, let's talk this out," I pleaded. "Andrew, there's nothing left to say. I'm done." "Done with what? Or should I say who?" My voice rose, suspicion spilling over. "I'm done with you." She shot back flatly and marched into the bedroom. I watched, powerless, as she resumed packing her bags. With each item she crammed into the suitcase, it felt like she was pulling away pieces of my life. Soon she was ready to leave again. Without even a backward glance, she slipped on her shoes, threw on her coat, and headed for the door. "Don't forget to transfer me half of what we've saved," she called over her shoulder before disappearing down the hallway. I couldn't stop myself. It felt like second nature. Money had always been something we shared, and we'd been saving up for that summer cottage. I decided to see where she was headed and peered out the window. A car was parked by the entrance, and she hurriedly climbed in before it drove off. "So, there's someone else," I muttered under my breath, grabbing my coat and heading for the door. I threw on my clothes in record time and stepped outside. The icy air stung my face, a sharp reminder that New Year's Eve was just around the corner, an occasion I'd apparently be spending alone this year. Wandering aimlessly through the streets, I found the festive decorations and holiday buzz grating. Their forced cheerfulness felt like a cruel joke. My thoughts spiraled until they were cut short by a sudden phone call from my boss. I'd completely forgotten I hadn't shown up for work today. "Hi," I said in a low voice to the boss. "You didn't come in today. What's going on?" His tone was sharp, impatient. "There's been a family issue. Could I take a few days off?" I asked, trying to sound composed even though I was far from it. There was a pause, then, "Fine, Andrew. I'll approve a week. But next time, let me know in advance." The call yanked me back to reality. Feeling heavy, I trudged home. The sight of the nearly bare cupboard struck a chord, a stark reminder of Helen's betrayal and the divorce that loomed ahead. That evening, my daughter called, worried about why her mother wasn't answering her phone. I told her the truth. We were getting divorced, and I had no clue where her mom was. She took the news calmly, though it clearly upset her. Work became my escape, my way of dulling the sting of Helen's departure. Occasionally, she'd call, asking for money, but she never brought up filing for divorce. It was a strange limbo I didn't know how to break. Months passed, and spring finally arrived. The days stretched longer, brighter, warmer. Slowly but surely, I was getting used to living on my own. Then, out of nowhere, something happened that shook me to my core. One day at work, a colleague approached me with an unusual question. "How's your wife?" he asked. I blinked, caught off guard. It had been 3 months since she left. Why ask about her now? "I wouldn't know," I replied dryly, assuming he'd seen her with someone else. He hesitated, then said, "Look, I visited my mother-in-law in the suburbs last weekend. In the evening, while out walking, my wife and I noticed a woman sitting in an underpass, holding a photo of a child and begging. My wife always gives to people like that, so we got closer. And when I saw her, well, I'm pretty sure it was your wife. Maybe I'm wrong, but she looked just like her." His words left me reeling. I got the address, took time off work, and headed for the suburbs. My mind raced, piecing together a puzzle I didn't have the edges for. What transition? What money? Nothing made sense. The trip felt both endless and fleeting. Soon, I found myself walking briskly down the steps to the underpass. From a distance, I spotted a figure, a woman who resembled Helen. As I drew closer, my heart sank. It was her, the same woman who had once vowed forever to me, who had brought our children into the world. But now she stood there in worm-dirty clothes, a scarf tied around her head, clutching a picture of a boy. "Helen," I managed, my voice trembling with disbelief. What are you doing here?" Helen stared through me as if I were a ghost, her expression vacant, her eyes devoid of recognition. It struck me. Something wasn't right. She seemed off, almost as if she were under the influence of something. Desperate to snap her out of it, I grabbed her shoulders and shook her gently but firmly. "Helen, it's me. What's going on?" I urged, but there was no reaction. Before I could say more, a voice broke through from behind me. Startled, I turned to see a man, clearly a gypsy, nervously fidgeting with something in his hands. "Back off," he said, his tone sharp. "Don't get in the way." I glanced around and noticed a small group of gypsies lingering nearby, their watchful eyes fixed on us. It hit me like a ton of bricks. She wasn't just begging. She was caught up in something far more sinister. My pulse quickened as I pulled out my phone to call the police. But before I could dial, the man seized Helen's arm and began dragging her away. "Hey," I shouted, reaching for her. But the others had already closed in, forming a wall between us. Their message was clear: back down or else. Fuming, I followed them outside, only to watch helplessly as they bundled Helen into a car and sped off before I could catch the license plate. I stood there, frozen in disbelief, my mind spinning. Back in my own car, I tried to process what had just happened. The pieces of the puzzle began falling into place. The delays in the divorce, her bizarre disappearance, it all made sense now. She wasn't just gone, she was trapped. They'd pulled her into this life, drugged her, and turned her into someone I barely recognized. Forced to beg in the streets, all for their gain. At first, a wave of pity washed over me. How could I not feel sorry for her? She was the mother of my children, the woman I'd once shared everything with. But the sympathy didn't last long. We're adults, aren't we? We make our choices. She'd left me, chosen this path, whether knowingly or not, and now she was living with the consequences. Part of me wanted to help, but the other part felt numb. She had everything with me: a home, a family, stability. But it wasn't enough. She'd gone looking for more, and now she was caught in a nightmare of her own making. It reminded me of that old story about the fisherman and the goldfish, where greed only led to ruin. I decided not to tell the kids. They didn't need to carry this burden. Sooner or later, they'd piece it together on their own. As for me, I had to move forward. This was my life now, a life without her. And maybe, just maybe, that was for the best.